Well, hello everybody, it's Holger Mueller here from Constellation Research, here with my esteemed colleague, John. How are you doing, John?
Good. It seems like just a few minutes ago, you and I were arguing over semantics and SAP in Orlando. Now you're in Mexico. I'm back in the Batcave, and here we go. We're going to try to make sense of all this.
Exactly, trying to make sense out of this despite technical difficulties. I mean, Holyland headsets are the best ones, supposedly. First, they don't come with the cable to connect. Then you have the cable and they screw your setup. So last minute thing here. I'm transpiring not because of Mexico, but just to make it. Plus, I noticed I think I can make my hair blend in my white wall background. So extra features for you guys. So let's unpack Sapphire, right? What was the biggest news from your perspective?
Well, it'd be funny. I was thinking next year we could maybe just ask Jewel to tell us what was good and bad about Sapphire.
Exactly.
But
or Gemini, or Llama or something, right? Because they have all the other exhaust. I'm not sure if the architecture of the foundation model and SAP side is going to go to public, because we can talk about a surprising statement on the foundation models too, right?
Yeah. Let's make sure we hit that. Look, shows are interesting, right? Because vendors have their top stories, and then I think you and I tend to have our top stories, and they're not always the same, right? So for example, you kind of think the foundation story is important, but the headlines were obviously about Joule and AI, the Microsoft Copilot partnership, and of course SAP went shopping and announced WalkMe, and we could kind of tell something was coming on the pre-conference day when we had analyst sessions. You could kind of tell they were going to say something, and they wanted to say it, but they couldn't. And then it came out 2 days later. They're acquiring WalkMe. I wrote about that on Diginomica. So those are kind of like the big things. But I kind of felt like some of the news that maybe didn't get top shelf was some of the most interesting news. So, for example, this commitment to putting enterprise architects on every project is interesting because it raises questions about on every RISE project. It raises questions about why that's needed. I think it's a good move, but it raises some important questions on why that's needed. And I think if you dig into those questions, I think you can get a better barometer on where SAP customers are at.
Very good point. I totally agree. And we get the same question from Paul Moderman. We have people on this call. How could this happen?
Hi, Paul. Well, Paul, I think I just started to answer that question, right?
Exactly.
Although I guess enterprise architecture, you could say that part of that is an AI readiness conversation, but I think the enterprise architect conversation is more about helping customers figure out this transition into, whatever you want to call it. Like, look, SAP has clearly recognized that they can't get by as an ERP vendor, right? Transactional systems are not where the action is as far as deriving value from enterprise applications. I would argue it's been that way for a long time, but now it's crystal clear. You get value out of transactions, but the big part of that is the data and what you do with it, and how you quote unquote empower people to act on that in ways that further your business. So everything that SAP is announcing in some way is about that, and AI is just considered the sexiest way to get there, but it's not the only way to get there by any means. So I think Paul's question is valid. And there's some other news items that don't pertain to AI also, but the enterprise architect one was a really interesting one.
Right. And exactly that question I asked to in the executive Q&A with Christian Klein, Julia White, Mohammed Alam, and who am I missing? Jürgen Müller, of course, my namesake colleague.
Because you actually in that question, one of your infamous Holder questions, you forbid them for saying anything about AI. That was tough, man.
but I spent too much time in the summer here in the sun yesterday at the beach, I guess, because I don't remember what Christian Klein, who grabbed the question, said. What I remember is that he cheated on the third one. He said, well, let's AI. So it was okay, forgivable. But the tweet is out there, so look for the tweet from Sapphire it was on Tuesday. I need to refresh my mind. I don't know what he actually said there before. So, hey, great question. And for me, the big news beyond that in the implementation, of course, the enterprise architect should make a big difference. We will see if WalkMe will make a difference. Maybe talk about WalkMe a little bit later. I did not see any significant functional areas. One of the big misses I had, and one of the big opportunities I still foresee from SAP for the installed base, is the manufacturing space. Their key competitors, Oracle, Workday, can't touch them there really, but they're kind of like sleeping on the wheel. And on top of that, in Germany, right, Industry 4.0, 4.0, right, they have so much local thought leadership people who are doing this that it's kind of like they have a huge advantage, something to say and to address, join becoming. Having that said, Next week, back to back, I don't know why they do this, is Sapphire in Barcelona with a European audience, which is even more manufacturing audience. So we'll see what comes out of it. But thank you for the great question, Paul.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple other things to Paul's question that we may want to get into. One is, I think the Paul, I'm going to try to come through for you here. The Clean Core certification for partners, I think, is really important. Not all partners are happy about that, and it's complicated, but it does. It's another acknowledgement on SAP's part that customers on so-called older versions, even of S4, are deeply problematic situations, and SAP doesn't believe it can deliver value to those customers. It doesn't believe it can deliver AI to those customers. And but SAP also realizes we need to support partners on this journey, because I've been calling it the BTP economy, but it's a different business model for partners. And if you don't come up with a way of recognizing that partners need to also be on this path, then SAP customers can't get anywhere. So I thought that was important. And then the other like interesting non-AI news for me was where was it on my cheat sheet here? Now I've already forgotten. Well, also there was a RISE certification, so that kind of comes into is like that we need to better equip partners to deliver on what we're talking about, because SAP uses the word RISE like in almost like a religious context, as if we understand what it means, and I think a lot of people still don't understand what it means, and so like being able to offer certification around it is one way of saying let's validate that.
That's a great point, but your timing is impeccable, John, because my co-host of quarterly calls about SAP, Martin Fischer from Neptune Software, who is a partner, from his perspective, guess what? What his biggest news was, right? Thank you for posting a question here. This is the most interactive thing I've done here ever, right? The Clean Core enforcement, says Martin, is the most interesting thing to me, right? And the RISE certification of the partners, right? I think that's a great point, and it shows to me that there's confidence by the SAP board to think that what they have in S4HANA is really good enough to drive customers. Yeah, and that is always the big question, right? Do these customizations work? But Thomas Sauersig had this great quote of together. They did an analysis of the Z tables, the custom tables being used at customers, or Z functions or F function, whatever it is. And over 60%, I think it was, of the custom things have not been touched in a year. Why a year, right? Because some things might be running once a year, so that's a fair comparison.
And another interesting stat there that SAP's been mentioning is that 60% of custom code modifications, right? Like that was the thing. It's like literally 60% haven't been touched in however many years, like at least a year, right? So that's part of the case that SAP's making there. Now we could spend the rest of the show probably debating Clean Core and like. And there's a really interesting debate on whether Clean Core is something that customers care about, or whether it's an SAP marketing exploit to try to get adoption, or somewhere in between. To me, the thing I like about the Clean Core discussion is that it provokes a debate around technical debt and how much technical debt should companies be acquiring and in what context. And so I think SAP's right that there needs to be more discipline around how we enhance our products, but it's interesting because not every customer is excited and not every partner is excited about what this Clean Core implication is. So
yes, no, certainly not, because I know of a number of S4HANA upgrades where the partners see the good old money signs tattooed behind their iris and say, ka-ching, ka-ching, we have to move all these customizations over, and that's going to cost you. We're going to build all this in BTP. And there's more than sticker shock, right? There's big sticker shock on this. And that's where I think the certification plays a role. I'm generally a friend of certification, because certification allows consistency, comparability, which is important. Like the certification at SAP was very successful of the different types of consultants, which was not a meatless, just get a badge. Some other vendors, which we shouldn't mention, do, but you really had to show something. So I had a certain standardization, knew that consultant would do that. Now they're trying that on a higher level, right? But the core question, and thank you, Martin, for that question, which isn't clear, close and dear to your heart, but DeVry, Bardan, Devraj, I hope you pronounce this right, is putting exactly the finger in there, right? So how many customizations do these customers have that are critical? I'm pretty bullish on this at the moment, because I think there's tremendous progress. And sorry that I say it here, John, I'm talking about AI here, right? Because I was at the IBM conference, and IBM has a lot of legacy code running on their mainframes, which are all running in COBOL and other stuff. And they showed super interesting code conversion from COBOL to Java to make it more modern, right? And we all know that COBOL and ABAP are distant cousins to a certain point, right? Because all the IBM funds, the SAP funders came from IBM and want to find a better ABAP file. So I'm hoping that there's going to be a better way to modify or to migrate the custom code that enterprises rely on. Yeah.
I think this is a really important question, and I do want to take issue with the last part that SAP only cares about moving customers to public cloud. In fact, the path from the private cloud version of SAP to the public cloud is not actually a super easy path at this point. And I will say that one of the big surprises as far as non-AI news stories at the show was the public cloud prominence, but SAP still primarily positions public cloud as the subsidiaries and mid-market play around Grow. The only mention of the large enterprise around public cloud was PwC, which is running it at scale within the services context. But a lot of industries don't feel like they're ready to move to the public cloud. One thing that was a huge surprise for me was on the ASUG pre-conference day, I moderated a cloud migration panel. And it was fascinating to hear some public cloud customers, one or two in particular, who are really passionate about that product and the value it delivers. And I was really impressed by that because I don't usually hear that kind of product love from almost any vendor's products, but definitely not from a lot of SAP. It's like SAP customers really value SAP, but that kind of passion that I was hearing, the customers literally challenging other customers in the room, like, you need to go to public cloud, like, don't be afraid, like, here's why the value is there, here's why you can absorb so much new functionality, here's where you get first access to all the AI functionality, all that stuff. Like, they made a really, really good case, and it was cool to hear customers taking that to other customers. And Clean Core is sort of the same way, where I would say that customers are very interested in Clean Core and learning more. But I also would agree with Devraj a little bit that customers also want to take this at their own pace. And I think one thing SAP overlooks sometimes is that customers have a ton of different ways they can approach transformation. And SAP has to make the case that they're the top priority, because there's other priorities too. You can ring fence your ERP system, and a lot of customers are saying that. Like, they're saying, my ERP is not broken, it does what I need. I want to invest right now in CX, or I want to invest right now in supply chain planning or demand management or whatever, and I don't want to touch my ERP right now. And so part of what SAP has to do, and I don't think they totally accomplish this at Sapphire, is to not only say why SAP can help you transform, but why you should start with SAP versus the million other things you could spend money on right now.
Very good point, John. Very good point. And especially with SAP, like all software vendors in their defense do, they provide the feature and they think people are just upgrading it right now, because they forget about the overall priorities, right? And to be fair, right, SAP is behind on generative AI for the point which customers ultimately appreciate, in the past at least, that SAP would be the Switzerland for the database vendor. You could use the database you want. SAP became the Switzerland for the cloud vendor. You can run the cloud vendor you want. And guess what? AI is being delivered for the cloud. So Phil Herzig, the guy in charge of AI and his team, had to put on BTP, a layer which allows you to call different clouds and figure out how, it's not clear yet how the whole data migration movement is going to work, right? So SAP, to a certain point, has to be fair to customers, also saying, this is totally new stuff, right? I mean, what can happen if you run around with our AI? So maybe some people will saying, you go first, John. I'll follow you gladly if you tell me if it works. And in the meantime, I just figure out what Gen AI can do for my point solutions or for other aspects of my business that are totally safe, like on rationalizing documents and so on. And that, of course, gets forgotten. On the flip side, that is what everybody who vies for IT budget has to make a good and compelling case for, right? That's the big question here behind that. Yeah, very good point.
So let's get into this foundation model thing a little bit, because this was one of your picks. This is an area you've been hammering SAP on. Why did you think this was like an underrated, important story for SAP?
So the foundation model architecture, in my view, is everything, right? Because it brings together this layer cake, which should start for everybody who wants to do AI, which is decent. So we can have a separate call on small models versus long models. I'm firmly in the long model camp, just to make a big model camp, just for the reason that we want AI to be as good, if not better, as humans. Let's forget the scary part on that. They can only do this if they have awareness of the real world. We make decisions in business all the time on what is the weather, how my soccer team played, whatever's happening in the real world, what the sentiment is, and so on. So you need to have the general boil the ocean layer cake on the bottom. And then you go up, and the question is, will there be industry models on top of that? There has to be a vendor model, which knows we call someone like this in our lingo or whatever. We had a great lost in translation between customization modification again. If you remember at the Analyst Summit, it all came back to me, the difference of customization, modification. Great. Somebody asked about user exits. Do you remember? User exits. And then on top must be a vendor-specific one and a customer-specific one, which says we don't call employees, we call them associates. right? What can go wrong in AI for us, for employees, if there's nothing about employees because all associate, or it's mixed. And then on top of that comes something which is customer specific. And if that architecture is right, the customer data will never go down to anything, which is the big, big fear, right? Because all layered up, because I come from the bottom useful. If it's hotter like this, in my SAP application success factors, I want to talk about my associates, which have a propensity positive to come to work.
All right, so I don't want to turn this into an overall like AI discussion, but I will take issue with the idea that a foundation model gives AI a view of the world as in a world model. I don't think world models have been successfully built at this time, but what I do think it does is it gives the AI much better context for how SAP data works and what connects the dots. So for those who aren't clear, what SAP is trying to do with the foundation model is to essentially compile and aggregate a bunch of customer related data, not private data, but anonymized type of data around SAP projects, around different industry domains. And basically what it wants to do is to protect when you do these queries and when you're asking the system for information, et cetera, or when the system is making predictions or alerts or perhaps even actions like they implied in spend management during the keynote, that they're doing that in as accurate way possible, because there's a real juxtaposition right now between the consumer models, which are still having an incredible amount of trouble, which they joked about during the keynote in terms of the famous example of glue in the pizza that came out of the Google AI, supposed AI helper, insightful search assistant spewing out garbage in the search results, versus an enterprise context where a much more sophisticated architecture is in play, which essentially incorporates both that SAP wants to incorporate both the foundation model data to essentially ground the model in SAP customer relationships and realities via knowledge graphs and things like that are going to be attached to that. And then also customer specific data in the prompt itself to essentially tell the LLM model, please limit your responses around the data components to stuff that we're providing you here. Don't just go and give us whatever you want. And so the idea there is that this is going to be a more responsible and accurate form of AI that delivers a better result. That's what SAP and pretty much all enterprise vendors are trying to do this in different ways. So I do applaud enterprise vendors for trying to get a more responsible version of this type of AI that we have now. How exactly it's going to play out depends, because it's still not going to be 100% accurate. So you're going to have to spend a lot of time thinking about when you put humans in the loop, when you fully automate and stuff like that. But I give SAP credit for moving forward on this.
Absolutely right, but fair potential misunderstanding warning here as a public service announcement. Walter Sun, right, the chief AI, I don't know what, said we have a foundation model which we then apply to all the different domains. That's not the usage of the foundation model term, though, that you as a vendor have one or you give one to the customer, right? The foundation model is something which you build on top of your next model on top of that. And it sounded very much that what I was saying, we take it, we parameterize it, which is definitely SAP potentially misunderstanding or redefining lingo, so be careful on that. There's a great comment from Devraj, one more time, I hope I pronounce it right. He's right, I wasn't sure, didn't want to say it. IBM is working on a ABAP to Java conversion language model, and who wouldn't have missed this longer time ago already? NVIDIA by themselves is working on the same thing, right? To move ABAP over there. Jensen Huang, the poster boy at all conference, of course, was remotely there because Computex is a little closer to his heart than Sapphire conferences. But that's something which we should not oversee, should not forget, no question about it. Shall we tackle the WalkMe issue, right? My former colleague, good friend, Raj Sundarazan, of course, former WalkMe guy, nice new glasses, Raj, right, is asking, shall we talk about WalkMe a little bit? So shall we jump into that now?
Yeah, look, the early market response was relatively favorable, and I do quote unquote see the synergies here. I think acquisitions are difficult because it all comes down to how you execute on them. I wrote a more in-depth piece on this. I think my biggest concern that I would flag around this would be and this is what I directly asked SAP leadership and published in my piece. I said, with all you basically just said a day ago, and Julia White said that Joule is the new UX. So if Joule is the new UX, then a lot of WalkMe's screen by screen navigation suddenly become irrelevant. So what exactly are you paying for here, and what is the risk exposure here? I think that's a valid question, but at the same time, I'm also, to kind of contradict myself a little bit, I'm also someone who doesn't think that we're all going to be interacting with systems just using an AI prompt interface anytime soon. So I understand, but I do think that there's there's a little bit of a risk attached here in terms of how quickly the user experience is changing right now and what WalkMe brings to the table, and also some potential redundancies between WalkMe's Copilot and what Joule is trying to do. But of course, SAP sees the upside to all of that. And in theory, what's going on here is SAP is trying to say that we recognize that you can't transform your enterprise if your users don't adopt the software and enthusiastically use it. And since WalkMe specializes in helping users more easily adapt and get results out of their systems, that's the rationale behind the investment, I think.
Right. So WalkMe to Joule is going to be the #1 use case, right?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, that's the thing, is like, how will these pieces fit together is very interesting. And SAP is going to be on the spot for this, right? Because they also announced the same thing with Microsoft Copilot. And so SAP is going to have to demonstrate that these copilots can actually get along with each other and actually share the flying responsibilities effectively and get us to the destination that we wanted to get to. I do think that in general, we're going to find that copilots do interact with each other fairly well, but this is still a little bit uncharted territory. So
yeah, and quickly for Microsoft, they overdone it with copilots, right? The average worker in the enterprise needs 5.5 copilots only for Microsoft. How's it going to work?
Right.
You re-architect the plane with like 5 seats next to you. And which one are you
Yeah,
going to ask
exactly.
for? And quickly staying on the Microsoft partnership, which was obvious, right? I mean, there would be something like this, no question. But the key thing for me is which AI will get the upper hand. Will it be the one of the productivity solution, or will it be one of the business application solution? Me coming from the business application space, I'm not saying the productivity solution is not important, but usually everything that happens productivity came out of the business application. So the superior assistant must win on the enterprise application side is my hope. But we know the big problem is, right, if you lose, it used to be the eyes and clicks of the users in something and become an API in the background, you don't get your fair share of the wallet. Right now, you might even lose the ears in the in the back end. You will get less of the share of wallet. So that's something which SAP has to think really well through from the Machiavelli side.
Well, right, because sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, you raise a really interesting point here, because one of the big things here is that when you become a commodity versus when you're kind of in the strategic part of the relationship, and I think to your point, if Microsoft were to end up owning the user interaction space, then Microsoft becomes very strategic, and then Microsoft just interfaces with SAP and delivers information. That's not what SAP wants. And I think you could flip it over on the analytics side as well, which is why SAP is making so much noise around SAP Analytics Cloud and DataSphere and stuff like that, because you don't want an analytics or planning vendor to come into your projects and essentially own the CFO relationship and own the CMO relationship and own the CHRO relationship, because they're providing the strategic planning and workforce planning and financial planning information to the customer, and then the transactional system just becomes a data repository, and SAP's fighting against that, right? So.
Right. Very good point. In the meantime, Martin Fischer is breaking lance for WalkMe, right? Because the expert UIs, right, which cannot rely and maybe are building or parameterizing even what Joule is going to say, are going to need some explanation, WalkMe to it, right? I think it's great timing for the WalkMe guys, because AI will definitely change the way how things are being interacted, and they did this in the right moment at the right time. But on a further data point, in my view, that from the board, including the congratulations, retired finally Hasso Plattner at 75, people should do something else than worry about what their software investments are doing.
Just real quick, yeah. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Christian Klein will still accept Hasso Plattner's phone calls. So I just wanted to just mention that. Yes, retirement, but if Hasso calls, I think people are still going to pick up the phone.
Definitely, but then the clock starts because he's on a consultant contract, right? So he can't do this too much, right? No, just kidding. But I think there's a confidence that actually we should talk about this for a second later, then table that for a moment, Hasso Plattner's retirement, because I think it did a change to SAP. Which we can speculate, talk about. But the interesting thing on the WalkMe side is that Christian, Thomas, Mohammed, who's new on the job, think that there's enough stuff that adoption is the problem, right? And then there's logically always a point, right? We look over to SAP's main competitor, Oracle, right on the Fusion side, direct load, Fusion, Confusion, and so on for a long time. At some point, there was enough stuff there. And there was 100% confidence that you can map from your old e-business suite, Siebel, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards application to the new Fusion thing. And it may not be exactly the same, but you can move over to it, right? And the confidence of that is there. I think SAP thinks and wants to promote this confidence. and thinks they can adopt $1.5 billion reasons why that it's adoption issue. I'm not so sure it's yet already an adoption issue and critical capabilities. We can talk about verticals. We can talk about manufacturing already and so on are already there, right? So that's the point here.
Well, right. So look, I mean, this is one of the other big changes is that ERP used to really be the domain of super users that were very protective of their turf, and they doled out information to other users on their team. And now it's much more where you want casual users interacting with these systems and getting the job done. Scott Russell, in his response to my question, used the example of someone using Concur who only goes in there once or twice a year when they actually travel, and they don't travel all the time. And so the idea is that interfaces like WalkMe can really help that type of user. And so, and when you think of younger talent, the bar is just so much higher for enterprise software now than it used to be, because don't tell me that talented so-called Generation Z type people are going to put up with the kind of green screen navigations. I mean, I realize that SAP's moved on from green screens a long time ago, but that's how they perceive a typical enterprise software UI. And so I think there's a recognition there, but I think the thing I like the most about SAP's ambition here is SAP is clearly saying adoption, and then we have to achieve not only adoption, but some level of satisfaction and customer success around that adoption. And if we don't do those things, then we can't sell. And so in other words, like Scott Russell's organization, they won't have any success going back into customers and selling more stuff if the product people don't do their job around adoption. And I think recognizing that is important. Whether that actually ends up playing out in reality is a whole different thing, because one of the things we see all the time with SAP is that the field salespeople are talking to customers very differently than the executives are. And this is particularly a problem around RISE, where a lot of customers feel like RISE is essentially like a non-optional mandatory thing for them if they want access to innovation. Whereas when you talk with SAP executives, they tend to be a little more empathetic to customers and their investments in the product over the years and stuff like that. And so field sales is always different, because field sales wants to hit their numbers, and they're going to push a different message.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Let's jump very quickly to the top with Hasso retiring, right? Who was a super influence on SAP, right? SAP wouldn't be SAP in my view without Hasso Plattner saying client server is ready, but what Hasso Plattner picking Oracle, because if he would have picked Ingress and Infomix, who were equally at the time in the early 90s there, right, which would not be an unreasonable choice at the time, lots of enterprises did those, then SAP would have to re-platform the development, would be dependent, Oracle would be partner, wouldn't have been able to build R3 as fast, and it's still the R3 leadership that got SAP there. On the flip side, we could do a separate podcast if HANA was a good thing or not. So we don't know. We don't have to go that.
Right? Yeah. Well, I think look. I mean, Hasso like deserves an enormous amount of credit. I mean, his influence extends into everything around like the design thinking investments he made and the investments in education he made through Hasso Plattner Institute, to what you said around how he was able to popularize SAP. And don't forget, like, when they originally developed SAP, they were sitting alongside customers, and I think he never forgot that. And he, and when he would do keynotes, everyone from comms and marketing would be sitting on their hands, worried about what the hell he was going to say next.
Right.
And not only was that great theater, but it showed that he cared. He cared about customers, he cared about their realities, and he spoke to those realities. And there's very few executives left in the industry that do that now. And so he deserves an enormous amount of credit for that. The biggest second guess you would give around Hasso is that Hasso, frankly, was, I'm sorry to not sugarcoat this, but he was hostile to the cloud. He was hostile to the multi-tenant cloud. And I think that cost SAP a lot in terms of investing in multi-tenant business applications. And you're seeing that to this day, where SAP still doesn't have a truly competitive large enterprise cloud product in the same sense that Oracle and Workday does, except in certain industries. But I do think, I will say though, that the enterprise software market is very forgiving, and everyone makes mistakes, and God knows I've made a ton of business execution mistakes in my career. So if I sat down, I could pick the same kind of things and say, John, why the hell did you miss that?
Yeah.
And we're all going to miss some stuff. And so that would be my only thing. But I think the market has given SAP time to catch up in this area. And you clearly see SAP's determination to do that now. So
yes. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Also, the whole thing around the Hasso Plattner Institute, the things that in Stanford on design chips benefited the whole software industry, right? And he had a strong passion for UI, which was always important. Now it might be changing. he thought the complexity of ERP is in the way how schema is done. This is why for him HANA was a silver bullet, also something familiar coming from the mainframe era that would change things. There's no question about it. He was, and he said himself, like 3-4 Solar Haze, I hang on too long for in memory, very critically. Only the owner operators like Bill Gates, who's long gone on speaking on the circuit, right? But Larry Ellison and Hasso Plattner can say this, right? Because every hired manager would not be in a good situation saying that. And I think one of the biggest things we'll see this year will be that this whole fear of spinning Rust or Hadoop, Lakehouse, whatever capabilities will be something that is always a question. It was the first question in a Q&A, right? Congrats to call out remote question. Robert Stroud asked the question, what about the Lakehouse, right? And we made the jokes where the Lakehouse is, but there was always winking that we all know, the SAP executives, that you cannot do AI in 2024 without a Lakehouse style Iceberg, Delta Lake, Apache, whatever architecture. So let's not dance around this and wink, wink, and say something will come later. And I think there's also time to a certain point that has to hold them back, despite saying it was a mistake. So I think it's going to be only a good move for SAP. Good.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and one thing that I think about too is like, I think I had my first group blogger meeting with Hasso probably like about 18 years ago or something like that. And kudos to Mike Persino and Stacy Fish for developing that program. They're no longer with SAP, but they were on the cutting edge and deserve that shout out. I hope SAP realizes how cutting edge that was. But I remember sitting down with Hasso the first time, and I thought I knew some stuff about SAP at that time. And he kind of intimidated me in a certain sense with the depth of his expertise. And after my first meeting with him, I was like, I got to raise my game in this industry, because if I'm going to come in and be taken seriously, because he did not suffer fools. Yeah. And I was like, if I don't really get my act together in this industry, I can't have a meaningful conversation with someone like Hasso. And so I worked at it, and every time I wanted to get into that meeting with him and ask him a question that actually made him think, and not something he could easily just put you in a corner, because he was ready for you. I mean, and even in the cloud stuff, he was ready for you. He would have his arguments as to why not. And, you know, and look, it's a complicated legacy too, right? Because by design was built in the cloud. And so it's not like SAP did not attempt to build cloud products. So perhaps I'm being a little bit unfair on a certain level for that. But the point is, he was ready for you, and you had to be ready for him. And I always respected him for that. I don't know if you had any experiences like that with him, but
exactly the same. I got to know him a little better. I was like board assistant for 1.5 years or so. I built SAP marketing in last century, long time ago, doesn't matter. Very strong, opinionated, but always willing to listen. Wouldn't show you that he listened all the time. That's a trait he shares from the many meetings. Larry Ellison as well. Somehow billionaires cannot say, hey, John, good point, we should think about this, which you hear a lot from the hired managers, which sometimes I feel like is an appeasement thing. Say, okay, don't beat me up on this anymore. I'll think about this, and hopefully you forget about in half a year we don't talk about this anymore. But from the owner side, you would then see, like with Hasso, in many situations, 3-4 months later or 2 months later, that was his idea. So, which is okay, right? I mean, you're there only to challenge people, and yeah, very intimidating at first, but it's a good person at heart, no question, and he doesn't.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but very intimidating at first. That's a question about this.
So I guess that does make that
made you better, John. Hasso made John better.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think some of those experiences in life with people that really, like I said, intimidate you or make you like feel like maybe you have work to do are some of the best lessons you can ever get. Right. Like much more so than the person that says, oh, you're doing great, you're awesome, you're so great. Like the people that can tear you to shreds a little bit in a way that makes you reflect are some of the best sometimes for your career. So tip of the cap to Hasso for that.
Exactly.
And by the way, I have to share my favorite Hasso memory, which was during his keynote. I don't know, 12 years ago, he looked down and Bill McDermott was on his iPad, and he literally called Bill McDermott out in the middle of the keynote and said, Bill, I see you on your iPad right now. I hope you're closing a deal right now. I was like, that's keynote theater at its finest. And we don't see stuff like that from any keynotes these days from SAP or any other vendors. So it's like,
because
oh my God.
we don't have enough owner operators, right? What I learned from Hasso, which carries me through into the conferences with the Holger questions, if you have logically reasonable questions, especially if they're backed by customer problems, there's no uncomfortable question you cannot ask whatever founder, billionaire, tech legend, and so on. And they may not show the appreciation to the question, but you have to get them thinking. You have to get them off balance, and that builds your reputation. Despite everybody saying, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. and so on, right? So, and hopefully the managed, hired managers, leaders appreciate more and more that kind of questions, because I know the owner operators totally appreciate that. Totally appreciate that. It's like, who asked that question? I want that question again. I want to see that person more, because anything which makes them think is actually at the end of the day good for the enterprise, and with that good for their customers. Cool. Enough.
Well, one thing is for sure is that whatever SAP succeeds or not with AI, that one's not on Hasso.
Right.
Like that's on the new leadership team,
exactly.
and so the pressure is off Hasso on that one. I can't hang AI on Hasso in any way. Like no. That's on the new people. So
certainly can. All right, let's make it back to the Florida swarms. What happened in Florida this week? Of things important. One of the interesting things is like SAP, did they give up on CRM? My colleague Liz Miller even asked the question, what about CX and CRM? And interesting approach by Ritu, can't pronounce the last name, forgot the last name, on the
CRM.
Thank
Indeed.
you.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. By coming from the backside, right? Because we know, which SAP doesn't say explicitly enough, right? They always say so many transactions are here, we run the world, right? But what really runs the world is sales and distribution, the SD module inside of ECC, whatever's been carried on. And building on top of that and coming from the back office to the front office, I think is the way to potentially make Salesforce challenge or more difficult. Because if you come from the front end side of CRM, which I've done many times in my career, tried to build this, nothing really happens in the real world if it happens CRM, right? You put in a customer, that customer will never get an invoice, right? You might get visited and spammed and so on, but nothing happens, right? You put in an order, and if it doesn't get delivered to fulfillment, nothing happens. You even close the deal, congratulations, you don't get paid for it. Yeah, so nothing happens in the real world with CRM. So coming from the back office where real stuff happens and making that better front office or CRM pros, I think is a very promising approach. So good to see.
Right, and I think a couple of things here. I mean, you could definitely see like a deeper commitment to CX in the SAP like keynotes, in the sense that like to your point around how this worked, there was a next generation sales cloud demo in one of the keynotes. There was the BMW intelligent product configurator in one of the keynotes. And so you started to see how CX would fit into, like you said, industry scenarios. And look, I mean, they're not trying to compete with Salesforce. That's sort of the whole point of the new strategy. But, you know, having just come back from Salesforce Connections, Salesforce is extremely strong and executing well, I think, in areas like marketing, commerce, sales, and the integration of those. But where you raise questions about Salesforce, I mean, you could raise price questions versus lower cost vendors, but where you raise questions about Salesforce has to do with things like back-end visibility, integration with back-end systems, and industry scenarios where a company like SAP in manufacturing, for example, is very deep. And so to your point, what I think they're trying to do with CX is really connect that back into those industry scenarios. And if they can do that, I think they will get some attention with customers. And by the way, the CX products, for the most part, are very microservices based and very quote unquote modular, which gets back to our platform versus suite debate and stuff like that. But the point is that you can plug that stuff in fairly easily to your existing systems. And I think that's part of the appeal.
Absolutely right. We have to push on the gas pedal. We have 40 minutes in. We don't want to make this too long, right?
Yeah.
We want to talk suite versus best of breed or whatever.
Right? That was a fun argument, man.
Yeah. So one of the things which was noticeable, and I want to put the feather in my cap for predicting, right, with more alarm coming from the spend side, meaning Ariba, Concur, Fieldglass. We had much more prominence, unfortunately, of Fieldglass in the keynote, right? The main presence was that. I thought SuccessFactors got a little shortchanged, but there might be also more things happening under new president and back.
Hey, just one real quick on SuccessFactors, though, because like you're right, there's only so much time in the keynotes to get to each area, but SuccessFactors isn't getting shortchanged in SAP's AI strategy. Every Gen AI component debuts in SuccessFactors first. So in that sense, SuccessFactors is not getting shortchanged at all. But yeah, you're
from all the SuccessFactors, always the one who gets the most utter boy or utter girl or whatever, all the stickers, because they're always the first to jump on the new technology, right? On Workzone, on AI, on whatever it is, and they always think they're going to gain something on HANA, right? They were the first of the 6 on HANA.
Where I would challenge SAP on SuccessFactors priorities would be have a Success Connect in the US and Europe every year. Don't rotate between those, because your competitors are doing a big HR tech show every year in the US and Europe, and you should too. So that would be my challenge to SAP around that. But just real quick on the spend thing, because I think it's important. Anyone who didn't watch the first keynote on the first morning with Christian Klein and Julia White, I thought the highlight of the whole keynote was when Tasha Thurman came on later and addressed the spend management portfolio, and she's just in command of what she's doing, and they were speaking to real life customer scenarios and how they've been able to show that some of the pain points in that can be dramatically decreased in various ways, including things like category management. And I really liked it because they were talking in the language of those customers and those customers' problems. And I thought it really like helped to balance or redeem that day one keynote, because I thought the day one keynote got off to a pretty rocky start in the sense of like, okay, you have NVIDIA, AWS, and Apple right in a row. These are all companies that are riding high in the saddle right now. Meanwhile, most companies in most major industry sectors are struggling right now. And despite their use of AI, they're not able to totally overcome market conditions. You can see that in the juxtaposition of the leading retailers versus NVIDIA's recent results. And so I thought SAP needed to really show a little more of the real world of customer realities. And I think the spend management thing towards the end of that keynote really helped with that.
Yes, and absolutely right. And the spend management always connected to S/4HANA. Right. That's what's been the big part. And this is Mohammed coming to this, commanding the spend management side, owning S/4HANA. The S/4HANA guys before solely working on the upgrade problem, whoever sets the priorities. I think that's a big aspect of, which leads us potentially in the suite argument, right? It's because
the suite argument
better together.
Hey,
right?
by the way, anyone who's watching, if you have any questions, fire them off now, because I don't think we're going to last too much longer here. So
more than we can handle. Great comments from everybody. Really, thank you for being so interactive here, right? So no question about it, right? But the question, of course, is like, is the suite back? Right? Is suite a good message for SAP customers or not? I always like suites.
Oh my God, I can't stand it, dude. Suites, monolithic suites. It feels like lock-in.
Dude, you know, on my diet, I'm almost 2 years on no sugar, since almost 2 years. Everything which sounds like sweet sounds so good.
That's probably why. But you know what's really funny about this whole suite debate that you and I had is that, and we had a big version of this on premise, ironically enough, in Orlando, is that I don't think we fundamentally disagree about what customers want right now. It's just the semantics of how to describe it. And I prefer the platform concept, because I think that's ultimately what you're building as a platform. And I think what customers ultimately want right now, because they don't want best of breed, especially within discrete product areas like HCM or CRM. I think customers increasingly want to buy from one vendor where they can. But I think what customers really want to see more of, and what we never see enough of at these shows, is examples of integrations onto their platform with the most popular components that they might already have in their landscape or they might want to keep. And look, I mean, you can always hope that eventually customers will convert to your product within your suite. But the idea of pushing them towards that with the suite language, I just don't feel it's the right language, but I guess we'll find out. One thing that Christian Klein did is he called it a modular suite. I like that a little bit better, because that implies more plugging in different things. But to me, I like the platform language better. It's just a semantic preference that I have, but maybe it doesn't really matter in the end, because we're not really talking about different things. We're talking, I think you and I view this very differently, in the sense of customers mostly committing to a couple of vendors and then having the ease of use to plug and play where they need to around it. I mean, to me, that's the future. It's not that best of breed thing coming back again. I mean, no one wants that. I mean, no one wants to manage like 50 different products in different landscapes all the time. So
yeah, I fully agree with you. I mean, it has to be a modern fleet, it has to be pluggable, right? Module, good term from the R3 days, right? Worked really well.
Well, we talked about modular versus composable, and some people hate composable because composable is probably a little idealistic. But anyway.
By design could have pulled it off, right? Quick historic as we do history, SAP pulled too early the plug on by design. Hardware progress would have saved by design, as it saved R3. One quick R3 history, I don't know why you go the history thing. My biggest concern right now is that the executives at SAP were not around in the 90s to feel the palpable excitement to move to client server and integrated suite like R3. And this is, I think, a big piece missing, that they struggled so much at doing compelling. And there was a great question, I forgot from who in the chat, the compelling ERP vision for the 21st century, because SAP is the category leader for ERP. And category leaders have a responsibility to redefine that as technology changes, like SAP has done from mainframe to client server. The client server, ECC to cloud, whatever we want, to the AI area is the big gap where I think SAP has to do better on coming up with how ERP should be done in the 21st century. I don't know what your take is on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, the one thing about modern ERP and I'm seeing there was a comment about the Green Ledger also, and I just real quick on that, because I missed a couple of the chat comments. SAP did consciously tone down some of the sustainability discussions this year, and that was a conscious choice on their part. We can debate whether that was a good or bad choice, but they said it was conscious, and they said that in one of the press conferences. In modern ERP, to me, so when I talk with customers who are running a quote unquote modern ERP platform, my key question for them is always, how does this software help you to serve your customers better? And by customers, I'm using that as kind of an umbrella term for stakeholders, because it could actually be suppliers. In some cases, it could even be employees. But the point is, how is it helping to serve your constituent groups better? And if you can't answer that question to my satisfaction, it's not modern ERP in my definition. So I just think it's a much more less insular concept. It's less transactional. It's more driven by external signals, and it's more contextually aware of other applications. And I think it's more analytical, and it's more real time, which is part of what Hasso was ultimately getting at within memory. And he was not wrong about that. Like, real time ERP, real time applications are the future in that sense.
Totally agree with you. Just add to it autonomous or self-driving. Things have to happen by themselves without humans showing up, because you're running out of humans in the world, right? So it has, the cloud is always on. It has free compute. It can run scenarios. I want to see so much more about diapers and beer scenarios, which are in the enterprise data, external data. But you're absolutely right. It's a combination how the external data then triggers things newly. We see this in my HR area, where there's payroll offerings now, which are always up to speed, because every payroll relevant event happens in the enterprise. Outside the enterprise for gig worker, re-triggers the payroll for that individual. The same thing should be the case for the financial close, financial ledger. The same thing should be the case for anybody who manufactures something. Resources in the enterprise should be always aligned to what's happening inside and outside of the enterprise, right? And here 100%. You go. Here you go, SAP. Here's your vision for ERP, courtesy of John and me. Just go and build it.
Yeah, right? and autonomous ERP is a really interesting one, right? Because I think it's a good phrase to use to challenge ourselves, but then we also have to be careful, because we're not necessarily totally ready for full autonomous software yet. But I think it is a good way to reframe things. Martin had a couple of interesting comments around adoption and obstacles around adoption. That support and automation isn't quite there, although I think SAP is trying to address some of that and some of the additional RISE offerings around application lifecycle management and stuff like that. And then RISE Premium Plus, and you can make your head spin with some of the different categories around different tactics SAP's used around RISE and stuff like that. And we didn't get into all of that today, but customers are, I'll be writing about this more, but customers are definitely frustrated with some of that. I do think that SAP's enterprise architect plan is part of what they're trying to do to help with that. They've recognized that they need to have more hands-on experts on these products to help with these issues. And along those lines, I think the really important question that you and I didn't get to so much here, but is always looming, is around partners. And that partners are going to have to help with this, because SAP, we discussed this with SAP, and they don't have time to provide every enterprise architect for every project. They don't have the internal resources or skills. They're going to have to rely on partners for this. And so SAP is really on the spot right now to make sure that partners feel empowered to be a part of this new future, both with providing things like enterprise architects, but also providing BTP services, and also just moving off of old legacy business models. And so SAP knows they have a lot of work to do there. And so that's one thing we're going to have to watch pretty carefully, because right now I'm not sure we could confidently say that partners are on the same page. And also, I want to see the smaller partners doing innovative stuff up on the Sapphire stage. I'm really sick of this rationale that's more of a tech ed thing. I'm sorry, but seeing partners building cool stuff on your platform is not a tech ed thing anymore. It's a Sapphire thing. It's part of your clean core strategy. Put the partners up on stage showing off cool stuff. Get customers excited about what they can build also.
Absolutely right. I totally agree on the importance of the partners, John. But it comes back to, is the AI ready argument, right? SAP just has built the AI layer, right? The same thing happened, and we didn't talk about BTP much. The build capability based on MacGyver and so on, working seamlessly, being really productive, is just been ready for kind of like first time prime time now, right? So things take a long time. There's always a jump of getting it done. I think we'll see much more, and it's so critical that build works to build the remaining crucial extension, customizations, modifications, whatever we want to call them, for having complete automation, modern automation, and differentiation. Because I mean, what you get from any standard software vendor, including SAP, I always joke, it's like the tax system, right? I mean, the tax system is the same for everybody. Some people have a smarter tax advisor, which is your SI, your implementer, who might be smarter, so you get something out of it. But if you really want to differentiate yourself, you need to have something like SAP Build, or in BTP, an EAP, an enterprise application platform, which allows to build differentiating capabilities. And that should be showcased, can be done by partners. It's a chance for partners to move from service to product revenue, because they know where the gaps are, they know where the skeletons are in the closet. They can build your capability in finance and purchasing, whatever is missing, and productizers get to better revenue than the time and labor model and so on. Massive opportunity changing that ecosystem. And you're absolutely right. Love to see more. Love to see the top 10 most adopted build applications, or 5 of partners, or whoever built them, customers. Customers might monetize them, right? The marketplace is there. I built something which is not strategic, but functionally, I don't care if other people are using it. I don't have to benefit it. I can make additional revenue and maybe fund the developers for the strategic part, which I'm not going to put on the SAP marketplace.
Yeah, and we see here Open Partner Day for customers, also so that partners can show their innovation and customer stories live. And, you know, that kind of stuff, like, we need to get more creative about event formats as well. I remember back in the day attending these pre-conference sessions with SAP where you would actually design prototypes, and there would be like business users involved, and kind of a hackathon, but with business users and stuff like that. We need a lot more creative formats to help people see the art of the possible. And so I would like to see just creative reinvention of enterprise events a lot more than what we do, but that's a whole different topic. One thing I will give SAP credit for is that the reason you and I can have a video like this and try to bring this information back out to people is because of how much framework they provide us to get back and forth with executives and stuff like that. They had no less than 3 open press conferences during their show. I have been to conferences this year where there was not a single press conference, which is truly embarrassing in this day and age. And SAP is willing to take these questions, and Holger, they don't always get easy questions. I mean, look at your questions. You ask these multi-part questions that put executives on the spot, like, what are you doing about this, this, and this? Give us 3 things right now. And they get into the fire and do that. And look, that is part of their job, but I'm just saying a lot of vendors don't do it right now. No. And SAP deserves a ton of credit, because they know that you and I are then going to go on a video and criticize some of what we heard. But they go ahead and do it.
They precede the questions, and you precede the questions, and you hear the same thing for the 10th time, and I think it's great for message consistency, but we all know it's not right. But I almost forgot one key thing which came out of the press conference. Unfortunately, I don't know who that is. The 2027 deadline for solution manager is a big challenge in the customers. But more importantly, my HR colleague can't say her name by heart, said next to me, asked Christian Klein, what about 2027? And Christian said something super important in the sense, and I verified with press colleagues and anybody else there, right, that he said he wants customers not to think of it as a rigid date. No customer will be left behind. And he wants customers to do things right. Before, it was almost this is a hard date, do the technical upgrade, figure out afterwards what's there. Everything is great. We put all this stuff into RISE. I think that's a big departure. Quick color from you on that.
Yeah, and well, we also heard another comment from another executive, I'm forgetting who at the moment, that was basically acknowledging that, look, we realize that if you hit the wall on this, you're going to look at competitors' products as well as ours. They're highly conscious of that fact, and they don't want that. And of course they don't want that, right? And what you said is exactly right, which is a bit of a softening around some of the messages here around mandatory upgrades and mandatory, you must do this in order to get this from us. There's a little bit of welcome softening on that. And, and to some of that, the user groups get credit. I met with DSAG leadership from Germany this week. I met with ASUG as part of their ASUG annual conference. And the user groups are working hard on this too, because the SAP does listen. It's just that SAP's also really got this hardcore market pressure going on from the Wall Street side. And so that's what the balancing act is all about. And any publicly traded vendor is dealing with this. And so I think we're hearing a more balanced message from SAP on this, and that's good. So we shall see.
Yeah. So what did we forget? Anything else to say? We are already running well over time, but we're picking up people watching. So thanks for everybody watching.
Yeah, it's fun. That's the thing about long shows. You want to start from the top again, and should we ask Jewel if Jewel has anything left to say?
Yeah, my question to Jewel is, or my question to John, which sounds almost the same at the beginning, is like, was this year's Sapphire better than last year?
Yeah, this is really interesting because I was kind of thinking about this in the sense that I think we overrate keynotes, for example. Like, it's really fun to say what you liked and didn't like about keynotes, and we didn't do that much of this in this podcast, except for me, I did it. But that's kind of like whatever. Like, keynotes come and go. I think what's really important about an event is kind of taking the pulse and the energy of a vendor, and also just putting questions directly to executives, and it's not only what they say, it's how comfortable they are on stage, and just their facial reactions. Even I put a lot of stock in when you ask them something surprising. Are they ready for it? Have they been thinking about it? And I detected more energy at this year's Sapphire. And I felt a lot of that energy was a positive momentum, that attendees felt engaged by SAP. And I don't know about you, but I just felt more energy than I have in past years. And part of that is just moving a little further past the height of the pandemic and stuff like that. But I think part of it is the content itself. Now, there was a little bit of angry energy around some of the Rise innovation stuff. So it wasn't all completely positive energy, but it was energy. And that was really good to see. So.
Totally agree with you. Significantly better than last year, dramatically better than 2 years ago. Pandemic, not pandemic. Maybe too hastily setting up the Sapphire 2 years ago in North America, but significantly better. More innovation for customers, more thinking around this. Will it be enough is a big question, right? We saw the Green Ledger was supposed to be GA, and to talk about it, maybe consciously decision. Europe cares more about it. Sapphire Barcelona is coming up next week, so maybe we'll have lots of things in the can. Last year I couldn't make the US, was in Barcelona, and was kind of disappointing to the point of the audience even being unhappy and feeling offended that no live speakers were there because videos were played in from the week before, which everybody who lives and breathes SAP as a customer has watched already, seen there, has been analyzed. So why do I go to Barcelona for this? So I keep my fingers crossed, not being there, but going to keep watchful eye that there's going to be more things in the can and a better treatment of the European customer base.
Yeah, for sure. And by the end of the year, SAP they have 40 Gen AI capabilities and products. Now they're promising 100 by the end of the year. They're also saying that 80% of the product in public and private cloud will be covered by Joule by the end of the year. That's an ambitious thing. So the point is, by next year, we should start hearing more customer experiences around these topics. For now, we have to wait, but that's pretty common in the vendor circus right now, right? Is that we're waiting on a lot of stuff around what this means in customer projects. So it is what it is. So and we should say also that SAP also made a point of announcing their alliance with UNESCO's AI ethics principles. And I do appreciate that SAP continues to put AI ethics as part of the conversation. And Walter's son and I had a good talk about that also, I'll be writing about. So I appreciate that SAP is taking the ethics of this at least as seriously as most vendors, because there are like profound considerations around ethics, and we could probably have another show about that. But we could have 5 shows, Holger. We still wouldn't run out of stuff.
I'm tired on this ethics thing, right? I mean, Microsoft, this should be your own video by itself, how Microsoft played Machiavelli on Google, right? And let go of
for sure.
Nobody talks about ethics anymore once you have it, right? So, and you have to prove me then you have all super working generative AI, ethical, not ethical, that you still talk about caring for ethics, because maybe in the down dirt, you ask for forgiveness later, right? So we'll see that, right? So that's another conversation. But I think what a couple of vendors are doing well, and I would put SAP in this category, is they're actually incorporating that into developer scenarios. And so when they build stuff, they're having it checked by the ethics board and stuff like that. So like you said, as a static set of statements, it doesn't really work. But you're right, because especially the consumer tech vendors that also have a consumer play like Microsoft or Google, you could hold their feet to the fire on all the ethical bullshit all day long, because it's a race for market share, and whatever happens. So if Google destroys the open web as a casualty of their new inline search, that's fine, no problem. We'll build an open web from scratch again, and we'll try to damage happens, right? But I saw a great piece which I can't see 3 myths discussed. One of them was, my ethics don't start when AI comes in. right? I'm not writing as a developer that I get a microcent for every transaction on my private bank account, right? I'm as a truck driver, I'm not going to drive my truck into people, right? So either you have ethics and you employ ethical people. It doesn't matter what the technology can do. The technology gets more powerful. There's more upside. There's more downside. We need the upside. So either you're ethical or you're not, right? You don't have to talk about this. And I think lots of this talking about ethics and AI, we know this already in past years, is just to gain and win time. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But that we would probably have to do another show to get to the bottom of all of it. So I'll let you have the last word on that.
All right, we're almost on. We're on top of the hour. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Holger. That was awesome.
Thank you. This is the most.
Thanks to the audience.
To everybody on the audience side. I think I've never had 54 live viewers on YouTube, I believe. Thank you to everybody. There's more on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody. If you missed something, if you said something wrong, you know, our handles up here. Please give us shit, right? Ask us the tough questions. I love to see questions where I think, oh my God, this is nothing new, right? I do back to me what I try to do to the executives to get some original answers. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Paul. Really enjoyed your questions. Thank you.
In Barcelona. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.